He's posted right outside of his home, about 10 meters away from his home. And so he was sitting in his home, and then he heard basically an announcement saying, "Come out of your house, come out of your house." So Khaled came out. He came out with his 3 daughters, Suad, Ahmed, and Samar, 2, 4, and 7, ages 2, 4, and 7. He came out with his mother, who was about 60 years old, and his wife. And so there was, 6 people out there? And they had 4 white flags, right? And they came out, and they were basically waiting to hear what the soldiers wanted. So when they walked out, what did they see? They basically saw 2 soldiers standing right outside of a tank. So there was a tank about 10 meters away from their home, 2 soldiers on both sides. One of them, based on what he told us, one of them was eating chocolates, the other was eating chips. What does that indicate? They were in no present danger. There was no danger. They're basically chilling out there eating chocolates and chips. 5 to 10 minutes later, a 3rd soldier comes out from the tank and he just opens fire. Completely opens fire and targets his children. And so his 2 daughters were killed, and his 3rd daughter, 4-year-old daughter, she was very badly injured. The bullet was lodged in her spine, and she actually is getting treatment in Belgium right now. She's paralyzed, and she's 4 years old. And I'm going to have Khaled speak about his own experience so that you could hear it firsthand. But unfortunately, Khaled is just one example of many, many, many examples. There are many examples of civilians carrying white flags, and they're specifically targeted. And civilians who are very clearly civilians, and they're specifically targeted. So I'm going to play this video.
الجيش الإسرائيلي سيطر على المنطقة هذه خلال ساعة واحدة في الاجتياح. احنا كنا بالبيت دخل الجيش، احنا كنا معتقدين ان الامان. ظل الجيش الإسرائيلي في المكان هذا المنطقة موجود في 7/1 بالضبط. أول ما صاروا من هناك اجى على الطريق هذا شمال اجى فوق من قبل البيت.
And they came around here and they stationed Kimdabebe. They stationed 3 tanks that came.
وقفت من الدبابة بعيدة عن البيت 10 أمتار بس، ووجهت بتفتحها على البيت. احنا كنا موجودين طبعا، كل العائلة تقريبا كان فيه حوالي 40 شخص، كل من عائلتي اخوتي واخواتي واولادي وولد ابوي والابوي وامي كنا بنطبق تحتاني. لانه اكثر امنا اعتقادنا انه اكثر امنا بنطبق تحتاني. فجئنا الى الجيش الاسرائيلي بيساعد علينا الميكروفون اللي بالبيت يطلع برا البيت. الساعة 12:50 طلعت أمي وزوجتي وبناتي وأنا. كنا رافعين رايات بيضاء. 4 رايات. وقفنا هنا تقريبا ما يعادل من 5 ل 10 دقائق ورافعين رايات بيضاء. بالضبط. كانوا 2 جنود برا الدبابة، واحد بياكل شوكولاتة وواحد بياكل شيبس. احنا ظلينا واقفين، ما قالولناش لا نطلع برا ولا نرجع على البيت. اتفاجئنا بيطلع جندي من الدبابة ومعاه سلاح وبده يطلق النار على الاطفال. معاه ب 16 بده يطلق النار على الاطفال. طلع بنتي امل عمرها 2 بطنها برا طلعت. كانت حاملة دبدوب. ما دبدوب حملاها، كانت امل لعبتها الدبدوب الصغير الابيض، انعدم الدبدوب معها. انا مش مستوعبين ايش بيصير، مش مستوعبين شو اللي بيسويه هذا، بطخ فينا، بطخ على الاطفال، بطخ على الارض، بتتجوز، ما فاهمين شو بيصير. بنتي امل لحالها مش اقل من 4 طلقات قدرت تكسرها، لانه كل بطنها طلع برا وضارها ب10 ضرب. انا لما شفت المنظر هذا حملت اطفالي، كنت حملت امل بالوقت، بدي احمل بنتي سمر للعلاج، اقلت 3 اطلاق بطنها، ضارها برضه طلع، عمود فقرها عندها كله طلع. عمرها 4 سنين. دخلت فيهم بسرعه على البيت جوا، ظل بالخارج اللي هو امي وبنتي ساعات برضه كانت طفوها هيك حوالي 10 12 خصات صدرها، من صدرها فتح كله. زوجتي ومضر وسعاد. My mother.
Again, that is one story, and imagine, I mean, we spent about a week, and every story that we heard during that week, and every testimony that we got that week was something very similar, where it was somebody was in their home, somebody was walking, and it was just, brute force. People walking and getting shot at, people seeing their mothers shot, people seeing their fathers shot, people seeing their daughters shot. I heard dozens upon dozens upon dozens of these very similar stories. And in this case, again, proportionality distinction, the proportionality distinction argument doesn't even come into play here. This is a clear targeting of civilians. And civilians, again, under international law, there's nothing that can justify targeting civilians. Specifically targeting civilians. Not even as collateral damage or anything like that. And when you have cases like Khalid Abdul where you have 3 daughters, 2, 4, and 7, they can't be anything but civilians when they're that young. So, that's one case, and there's no way, in my mind, that can be justified as Hamas militants. Israel came out saying recently that they had their report, did an investigation and blah, 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 mistakes were made. Unfortunately, mistakes happen a couple of times. They don't happen consistently. And this is what happened. This was a constant and consistent message throughout our delegation, where people's families were constantly attacked, constantly targeted. And just looking at the numbers, these are just the numbers. There was about 1,417 people, Palestinians, that were killed during the 22 days, as compared to 13 Israelis. 4 of the 13 Israelis were killed by friendly fire, so they basically killed themselves. So you have 1,417. That's more than 1 to 100. That's, again, proportionality issues. Out of the 1,417, you have 926 civilians. And what defines a civilian? A civilian is somebody who's not engaged in combat, basically. Somebody who's not enrolled in their military wing or whatever. Somebody who's not engaged in combat. That is a civilian. So 926 out of the 1,417 people that were killed, Palestinians that were killed, were, quote-unquote civilians. Then you had the 255 police officers, and Israel had no shame about putting this out everywhere, that they targeted police stations and they very specifically attacked police stations. The problem, though, under international law and under just normal law, even if the police officers were, they were under the guidance or the guide of Hamas, because Hamas is the ruling party, they're still civil servants, and they're still considered civilians under international law. So even though these 255 police officers are not under the 926 civilians, they're still considered civilians under international law. So add that on to the 926 civilians that were killed. You have 431, this is a separate number, 431 children that were killed. Again, a third, that's about a third of the people that were killed were children. And remember, 800,000 out of the 1.5 million people that live in Gaza are under the age of 18. So about 60-some% of the people that live in Gaza are under the age of 18. So again, this should come as no surprise that you have such a high death toll amongst the children. And then 121 women that were killed. In addition to actually targeting and attacking Palestinian civilians, Israel constantly used human shields quite extensively. And we always hear the reverse of this, that Hamas used human shields. One thing that we do not hear, and one thing that Israel does not talk about, is their own use of human shields. And actually, in 2005, I believe, the Supreme Court of Israel actually outlawed the use of Palestinians as human shields because it was such a flagrant policy in the Israeli military to use Palestinians as human shields. Despite that, human shields were still used in Gaza. And this has been documented not only by ourselves, but documented by The Guardian and other newspapers and other news agencies. So this is the story of Sami Rashid Muhammad. He's a man that I personally interviewed. And he was at home, and when the Israeli military, they came in, they took over his home, they pretty much held his family hostage for 4 days. While his family was held hostage, he was taken out by the military, and he was forced for 4 days to serve as a human shield. So what does that mean? That means that he was blindfolded and handcuffed most of the time, and he was basically forced to walk in front of tanks and in front of foot